My credit report notification came at 6,047 on a Tuesday morning, the kind of Tuesday that was supposed to be ordinary. I was standing in my kitchen, still in pajamas, mug in hand, when my phone buzzed with an alert I had never seen before. Alert: new hard inquiry detected. Estimated credit score drop 47 points. I set the mug down so hard coffee sloshed over the rim. I was 28 years old, a registered nurse working night shifts at a county hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and I had spent the last 4 years building a credit score I was privately proud of. 791. I checked it the way some people check the weather. Carefully. Consistently. Because where I came from, a good credit score was not a given. It was a miracle you manufactured yourself, stitch by careful stitch, and now 47 points were just gone. I opened the app with shaking fingers. The inquiry had been filed 3 days ago. A lender I had never heard of, a personal loan application for $43,000 in my name, using my social security number, my date of birth, my mother's maiden name as the security answer. There was only one person alive who knew all 4 of those things at once. My brother. Derek Monroe was 32 years old and had been the family golden boy until he wasn't. Charming, quick-talking, the kind of man who could convince you the sky was green and leave you questioning your own eyes. He had my mother's smile and my father's nerve and absolutely none of either of their work ethic. He had borrowed money from me 11 times in the last 6 years. I kept a note in my phone, not out of bitterness. I told myself that. I kept it because I needed to remember that each time felt like the last time, and each time was not. I called him before I even put shoes on. He answered on the second ring. "Hey Cass, what's up?" That voice, easy, unhurried, like a man with nothing to hide because he had already hidden everything perfectly. Derek. I kept my voice level the way I'd learned to keep it on the floor during a code. Steady hands, quiet mouth, no room for panic. Why is there a loan application in my name for $43,000 filed 3 days ago? A pause. Short, but I had known him for 28 years. I was going to tell you. I sat down on the kitchen floor, not because my legs gave out, because something in me needed to be close to the ground. Tell me what exactly? The business opportunity, Cass? I told you about the gym. My partner backed out last minute and the lease was already signed and I needed to move fast. I knew you'd say no if I asked, so I figured I'd make the first 3 payments and then tell you and you'd see it was working and it wouldn't even matter. He kept talking. Something about square footage and membership projections and a smoothie bar that was going to be the real moneymaker. I stopped hearing words and started hearing a sound instead, low and steady and ancient, like a floorboard giving way under years of quiet rot. Derek. And honestly, Cass, the interest rate is actually pretty reasonable for Derek. He stopped. Did they approve it? Another pause. Longer this time. Most of it. How much? 31,000. I stared at the coffee puddle spreading slowly toward the edge of the counter. $31,000. More than 6 months of my take-home pay. Borrowed against my name, my number, my history, without a single conversation, without a single question, without the most basic courtesy of asking me if I was willing. That's fraud, I said. He laughed, actually laughed, the easy, dismissive sound of a man who had never once been held responsible for anything. Come on, Cass. It's not fraud, it's family. You always help. You helped with the car, you helped with the rent, you helped when Jess had the baby. This is just bigger. The gym is going to be real, you'll see. I just needed someone to believe in me. Someone to believe in him. I had bought his first car. I had co-signed his apartment lease when he was 26. I had covered his phone bill for a year and a half without him asking me to stop. I had given him money for a business course he never finished, for a certification he never took, for a trip to Phoenix he swore was a work conference and was not. I had believed in him every single time. Who else knows? I asked. Mom. She helped me with the security questions. I closed my eyes. There it was. My mother. Linda Monroe, 61 years old, retired bookkeeper, maker of the best peach cobbler in Franklin County, and the woman who once told me, when I was 12 years old and crying because I couldn't afford to go on the class field trip, That crying was just complaining with tears. She had known. She had helped. She had given him the key to my financial life like it was hers to give. I hung up without saying another word. Then I did something I had never done before in my entire life. I called in sick to work. Not because I was broken, because I needed 8 clear hours and a quiet apartment and no interruptions for what I was about to do. The first call was to the lender. I explained that I was the victim of identity theft perpetrated by a family member. I used those exact words. Identity theft, victim. I did not soften them. The representative put me on hold for 4 minutes and came back with a case number and an email address for their fraud department. I wrote both down in the same notes app where I kept track of every dollar I had ever given my brother. The second call was to my bank. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus before noon. Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. Each one took less than 10 minutes. Each one felt like turning a deadbolt I should have installed years ago. The third call was to the Columbus Police Department's non-emergency line. The officer who took my report was tired and matter-of-fact and used the word unfortunately 3 times in 4 sentences. But he gave me a case number, and a case number is a paper trail, and a paper trail is the only language certain people understand. My phone had been ringing since 20 minutes after I hung up on Derek. I silenced it and let the calls stack up like unpaid bills. My brother. My mother. My Aunt Carol, who I had always suspected was the family's primary information distribution network. My cousin Bethany, who I genuinely liked and whose name in my notifications felt like a small, specific grief. I did not answer any of them. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet. I am a nurse. I work in facts and documentation. I listed every loan, every favor, every covered bill, every cosign, every transferred dollar going back to when I started working at 22. I had helped Derek to the tune of $38,000 over 6 years, not counting the $31,000 he had just stolen. I had given my mother $12,000 across various emergencies. Her car, her dental work, a plumbing situation she described as catastrophic, and which I later learned was a leaky faucet. I had helped my Aunt Carol move twice, which is not a dollar figure, but should be. I looked at that spreadsheet for a long time, then I pulled up the loan documents the lender had emailed me. My signature had been replicated, not perfectly. There was a stiffness to it, the way a copy always carries the ghost of effort, but close enough to pass a basic review. Derek had practiced, or he had used one of the checks I had written him years ago, held up to light. Either way, it was deliberate. It was not a moment of desperation, it was a plan. That was the part that did it. Not the money. The plan. I pulled up my mother's contact in my phone and looked at it for a moment. 28 years of Tuesday dinners and holiday drives and her voice on the other end of the line every time something went wrong. Her number was the first one I had ever memorized. I could still feel the rotary of her old kitchen phone under my 7-year-old finger. I changed my phone number that afternoon. I did not give the new one to my mother. The cosign I had on Derek's current apartment lease, I contacted the property management company and submitted formal notice of cosigner withdrawal citing documented fraud, attaching the police report number. They informed me the withdrawal would be processed in 30 days per the lease terms, at which point Derek would need to qualify on his own or vacate. I already knew he could not qualify on his own. I did not feel guilty about knowing that. There was a joint streaming account I had been paying for, my mother, Derek, Aunt Carol, and occasionally Bethany, though Bethany at least occasionally sent me a thank you text. I removed everyone and set the account to single user. I know that sounds small. It is not small when it is the 4th thing you do in a single day and each one is a thread you are pulling out of a knot you did not tie. I worked a 12-hour shift the next night. I moved through it the way I move through every hard night, focused, task by task, one patient at a time. Around 3 a.m., in the break room, one of the older nurses named Patricia asked me if I was all right. I said I was fine. She looked at me the way experienced women look at younger women who are fine. You sure? I reported my brother to the police today for identity fraud, I said. So I'm fine in the way you're fine after you've done something that needed doing. Patricia nodded slowly. She poured herself a coffee. After a moment she said, "My sister cleaned out my mother's savings account the year before she died. We never reported it." She took a long sip. I still think about that. I went back to the floor and I thought about that for the rest of the shift. The messages came in waves over the following week. At first they were angry. Derek, you actually called the cops? On your own, brother? Do you know what this does to me? My mother, I raised you better than this. Family takes care of family. This is embarrassing. Aunt Carol, surprisingly creative. What kind of person turns their back on blood over money? Money comes and goes. Family is forever. I read them all exactly once and did not respond. Then they shifted, softer, more careful. Derek, look, I know I messed up, okay. I was desperate. The gym was going to be real. I just needed someone to believe in me and I didn't know how to ask. My mother, Cassie, please just call me. I'm your mother. Cassie, please just call me. I'm your mother. Whatever happened, we can fix this as a family. As a family. I thought about that phrase. I had heard it my whole life as a kind of trump card, played whenever someone needed to override logic or fairness or basic self-preservation. As a family, we handle things internally. As a family, we don't involve outsiders. As a family, you help when asked and sometimes when not asked, and you do not, under any circumstances, let the outside world see that the house is on fire. I pulled up my note in the phone. $50,000, roughly, over 6 years, given freely to people who treated my generosity as a subscription service. I thought about the 12-year-old who got a job at the pharmacy after school because her mother's electricity was about to be cut and someone had to do something, and that someone had always been me. I thought about every Christmas I had made possible and every birthday I had funded and every emergency I had absorbed like a shock absorber until I simply bent around the impact and never fully straightened again. Then I opened my laptop and started looking at apartments in Pittsburgh. Not because I needed to move, because I needed to look, because I needed to understand, viscerally, that there was a world outside the gravitational pull of this family and I could choose to live in it. The fraud investigation moved slowly, the way all institutional processes move. The lender had opened a formal investigation. The detective assigned to my police report called me twice, with questions I answered precisely and documentably. I had kept everything. I have always kept everything. When you grow up in a house where agreements disappear and promises evaporate and the story changes depending on who's telling it, you learn early to create your own record. 6 weeks after I filed the report, I got a call from the lender's fraud department. The loan had been formally flagged as fraudulent. They were zeroing out my liability. My credit score, which had dropped to 744, began its slow recovery. I watched the points come back like a patient watching lab values normalize after a long illness. Small improvements. Consistent direction. Derek called me from a number I didn't recognize on a Thursday evening. I answered by accident, reaching for my phone in the dark of my bedroom thinking it was the hospital. Cass. I went very still. The case went to the DA's office, he said. His voice was different. The easy looseness was gone. He sounded like a man who had finally understood that consequences were not theoretical. They're talking about pressing charges. They said it could be felony identity theft. I said nothing. Cass, come on. I'm your brother. You know I wasn't trying to destroy your life. I made a bad call. You can tell them you don't want to press it. You can tell them it was a misunderstanding. You have that option. I thought about Patricia in the break room. I still think about that. I thought about my 7-year-old finger on the rotary dial of my mother's kitchen phone, memorizing her number because she was the safe person, the permanent person, the first number you learn in case you ever get lost. I had been lost for a very long time and I had not realized the phone I was calling for help was the same one that kept sending me in circles. I reported what happened accurately, I said. The investigation will proceed according to what the evidence shows. I'm not going to lie to a detective to protect you from what you actually did. A long silence. So that's it. That's how you feel about family? That's how I feel about $43,000 and my social security number and my mother's maiden name used without my permission, I said. Good night, Derek. I blocked the number. 3 months after it all started, my hospital held a small recognition ceremony for nurses who had completed an additional certification program. I had finished mine 6 months earlier, critical care transport, something I had been working toward for 2 years. My supervisor handed me a small plaque in a conference room with bad fluorescent lighting and decent catered sandwiches, and I stood there holding it and thought, no one in my family knows I did this. Not because I hid it, because I had stopped sharing the things I was proud of with people who used my success as a reason to need more from me. After the ceremony, a colleague named Mara drove us to a wine bar downtown. We sat in a corner booth and she asked me how I was really doing because Mara has a talent for asking that question at precisely the moment it lands. I told her most of it. The loan, the police report, the silence. She listened the way good people listen, without filling the space with her own story. When I finished, she said, "Do you feel guilty?" I thought about it honestly, the way I had been learning to do things, honestly, without performing an emotion I thought I should have. I feel like someone who finally got to a doctor after years of managing pain at home, I said. Like there's something that was wrong for a long time and now someone has seen it and named it, and the naming is uncomfortable, but it's also the only way it actually heals. Mara raised her glass. I raised mine. My mother emailed me eventually, from her personal account with the floral background she had used since 2008. The subject line said, "Please." I opened it because I am still human and she is still my mother and some doors take longer to close than others. She wrote that she hadn't understood what she was doing. That she thought she was helping Derek. That she didn't think I would actually find out. Or if I did, that I would understand it was love. That it was family. That it was just the way they had always done things. That last part was the most honest thing she had probably ever written to me, and she didn't even know it. It was just the way they had always done things. That was exactly right. It was the way they had always done things. And I had been the thing they had always done it to, and I was no longer available for that particular tradition. I did not reply. But I read the email twice, and then I filed it in a folder I labeled Evidence of Awareness, because if she ever understood what she wrote, that sentence would matter. And if she never did, I needed to remember that she had written it. The lease cosign officially cleared in month 2. Derek's landlord sent me written confirmation. I don't know what happened after that, whether Derek found another cosigner or moved somewhere cheaper or called our mother and made her a different kind of problem. I chose not to know. Not knowing is a skill I had to learn like any other. It did not come naturally. I had spent my whole life as the person who needed to know, who needed to fix, who needed to make sure everyone was all right before she allowed herself to be all right. Learning to not know felt like setting down a weight I had carried so long I had stopped noticing it was heavy. I found a therapist that spring. Her name was Dr. Okafor, and she had a small plant on her windowsill that she never watered while I was there, but which was always somehow thriving. The first thing she asked me was what I wanted from our sessions. I said I wanted to understand why I had let it go on so long. She said, "Let's start with when you got your first job." I said, "I was 12. The electric bill." She nodded like she had been expecting that answer. Like she had heard it before in 100 different versions from 100 different women who had learned to carry the house before they were old enough to drive. We met every 2 weeks. I started sleeping better around month 4. My cousin Bethany texted me in the summer. Not about the family situation, not with anyone's message forwarded, just a simple text that said, "Hey, I heard what happened. I just want you to know I'm not mad at you and I think you were right." Then a pause and then, "Also, I never said thank you for helping me move twice. Thank you." I stared at that text for a full minute. Then I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I've missed you." We got lunch the following week. She told me Derek had moved back in with my mother temporarily, which surprised neither of us. She told me my mother had taken down my photo from the hallway wall and then put it back up 2 days later, which I found oddly moving and said nothing about. She told me that at the last family dinner, my uncle had asked where I was and my mother had said simply, "She's busy," and the table had moved on. She's busy. After everything. After the loan and the police report and 4 years of carrying them and a credit score that took 6 weeks to stop bleeding, after $38,000 and 12 Christmases and a childhood spent working so they could pretend everything was fine, she's busy. I laughed so hard that Bethany startled. Then she laughed too, the slightly confused laugh of someone who doesn't quite understand the joke, but can see that it's real. And it was real. It was the realest thing. Because there is a moment, somewhere in the process of finally choosing yourself, when the absurdity of the alternative becomes genuinely funny, when the idea that you were supposed to absorb that much damage and call it love becomes so clearly, obviously wrong that all you can do is laugh at the years you didn't see it. I am still a nurse. I am still in Columbus, though I did eventually look at those Pittsburgh apartments long enough to find one I liked, and I think about it sometimes the way you think about a door you haven't opened yet but know is there. My credit score recovered fully by October, landed at 803, higher than it had ever been, as if my financial history had been waiting for the fraud to be removed so it could finally show its real shape. The gym Derek tried to open never opened. I learned this from Bethany, who learned it from someone else, through the particular telephone game of family information. The lease was signed and then abandoned, and apparently there is still a smoothie bar counter installed in an empty commercial space somewhere on the west side of Columbus, and I think about that sometimes too. A counter built for something that never happened, waiting for someone to believe in it. I believed in him. That's the part I have made my peace with and am still making my peace with, because it is not a small thing and it does not resolve cleanly. I believed in him because he was my brother and because I was raised in a house where love and obligation were the same currency and I had not yet learned to spend them separately. I gave him money because I genuinely wanted him to be all right. I wanted all of them to be all right. That wanting was real and it was mine, and no one can take it back and turn it into something shameful just because it was taken advantage of. The love was real. The exploitation was also real. Both things can be true. Learning to hold them both without letting one erase the other is, I think, what my therapist calls integration, and what I call the long work of a Tuesday morning in pajamas, coffee on the counter, a phone alert that changed the shape of everything. My birthday came in November, 29 years old. I took myself to a restaurant I'd been meaning to try for a year and sat at the bar and ordered the pasta and a glass of the second cheapest wine, which was excellent, and I did not check my phone once during the meal. No calls came from my mother, no text from Derek, no @Carol or group chat notification or forwarded screenshot, just a quiet bar and good pasta and my own company, which I was finally learning to enjoy. On the way home, I stopped at a pharmacy and bought a small succulent for my kitchen windowsill. The kind that doesn't need much water, the kind that thrives on a little neglect and a lot of light. I set it next to my coffee maker and I thought, this is what I am building now. Small things that belong entirely to me. Things that grow because I tend them, not because I pour myself into them until I run dry. The next morning my credit alert buzzed at 7:02 a.m. This time it read, "Your score has increased to 811. I smiled at my phone. Then I made coffee and went to work. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from working too hard, but from carrying people who never once asked if the weight was too much. Cassie carried that weight for years, quietly, competently, the way she did everything, and when she finally set it down, some people called it cruelty. I want to talk about why it wasn't. What happened to Cassie was not a single bad decision by a desperate brother. It was the final result of a pattern that had been built and reinforced over 2 decades. Every time she covered the bill without being asked, every time she absorbed a consequence that wasn't hers to absorb, every time she let family override fairness, she was teaching the people around her that there was no limit to what she would give. She didn't teach them that out of weakness. She taught them that out of love. But love without boundaries doesn't protect anyone. It just trains people to take more. That is the cause. The effect was a Tuesday morning, a credit report, and $43,000 borrowed in her name while she slept. What strikes me most about her story is not the fraud itself. It's the clarity that came after. Cassie didn't rage. She didn't collapse. She opened a spreadsheet and a notes app, and she did what she had always done. She worked the problem. The difference was that this time, she worked it for herself. She filed the police report not out of revenge, but out of something more durable. The understanding that protecting yourself is not the same as abandoning someone else. It only looks that way to people who are counting on you not to protect yourself. Integrity is not about being agreeable. It is about being honest. With others, yes, but more importantly with yourself. Cassie had been dishonest with herself for years, telling herself that giving was the same as loving, that silence was the same as keeping the peace, that absorbing damage was the same as being strong. The moment she stopped telling herself those stories was the moment she became genuinely strong. Not strong in the way people mean when they want you to endure more. Strong in the way that actually matters, clear-eyed, boundaried, unwilling to participate in your own diminishment. Resilience is not the ability to survive anything thrown at you. Real resilience is the wisdom to stop standing in the path of what keeps being thrown. Cassie learned that. It took a credit alert at 6:37 in the morning to make it undeniable, but the knowledge had been building in her for years. She had simply needed permission to act on it. And in the end, the only person who could give her that permission was herself. The people who called her heartless when she filed the report, they were not wrong that it hurt them. They were wrong about who was responsible for that hurt. When you build your life on someone else's willingness to absorb your consequences, the day they stop absorbing is going to feel like an attack. It isn't. It's just the moment the structure shows its real shape. Cassie is a nurse. She understands better than most that you cannot treat a wound you refuse to name. She named hers. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything.